Hello. Welcome to Private Investigator live stream number 3. Let's begin with a short prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, Lord and Master of our lives, please make us the best versions of ourselves so we can lead others to you by our lives and our love. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hello, I'm Larry Kaye with ShadowAnyone.com. This is Private Investigator live stream number 3. Today I'm going to share with you, I tried to investigate without using restricted access paid websites, and I'm going to tell you how that's worked out. Like I say, I tried and have been doing investigations without access to restricted access databases, these database providers. There's some big ones out there. If you're not familiar with them, I'll tell you a little bit about them. You subscribe, usually there's a monthly fee, and then there's also a lot of times a per search fee, and they are just remarkable, wonderful services. Any professional investigator should 100% be using them, no doubt about it. What they allow you to do is just aggregate a ton of information very quickly and very efficiently, and then present it in a way that you can see what's there, make connections, and use it to get the results for your case. And use skip tracing, for example. That's, a prime example of where you might use these paid access databases. So what you might do, for example, this is a very, very common example. You can search by a variety of criteria, but say social security number, for example. You punch in a social security number, and you will get back, if you printed it out, to get 18 pages of information off of just starting with a social security number. Not unusual, very, very common. What kind of information are you going to find there? You're going to find a pretty good address history. You're going to find pretty good registered motor vehicles to that person. You're going to find some ridiculously amazing things, like every address in that person's address history. You're going to see every other person who's ever, past or present, used that address. You're going to see all the motor vehicles registered at those addresses, past or present. And so you can see why you can get to that like 18-page mark pretty quickly, because it's just a ton of information. 99% of it, 98% of it is not related to your skip, but you get a ton of information. So how does this help you? Well, it helps for a variety of reasons, but let's take a really classic example, and this has just served me well over the years. An experienced investigator, somebody that knows what they're doing with this pile of information. If you don't know what you're doing, you've just made your situation worse, because there's a million things there to look at. It's like punching their name into a search engine and just getting lost down that rabbit hole. But when you know what you're doing, you start to look through this information and you say, well, there's a car registered at my skip's previous address. It's not registered to my skip, it's registered to this other guy. And then later on, at a different previous address for your skip, you'll see that same car registered again. And, what these databases are not always great at is spitting you out a current address on somebody. If it was that simple, a lot of times companies and people would have dealt with this skip long before they come to you. But what you're able to do now is to say, if this car is registered at 2 different addresses that the skip has used, that's not a coincidence. That's not a random chance lightning strike. This person has moved from residence to residence with your skip, and finding that person may be much easier than finding your skip and that person, one way or another, through pretext or a current address or whatever, may lead you to that skip. And it's not hard to imagine that. It happens all the time. You have this roommates move from place to place all the time. Your skip may have decided to just drop off the radar for whatever reason. But this roommate has not been that cautious. Finding the roommate from all these previous times, or 2 previous times, you can get a current address. And lo and behold, you find your skip at that address. So that's an example of how these paid restricted access databases can help you, and it's just wonderful. Who has access to these restricted access databases? Private investigators obviously do, but not most people. Now, here's the weird thing. A lot more people have access to that information than you might think. Property companies do for screening tenants, pre-employment companies, businesses have access to that for doing loss prevention and for pre-employment screening. All sorts of companies, banks, retailers, all sorts of companies, manufacturers have access to that information for anti-fraud purposes. So the information is really out there. A lot of people, and some people you probably don't think should really be able to have that easy of access, have access to it. But these companies do try to keep their thumb on top of who gets into those databases and who doesn't. And it's a very self-preservation thing, I believe. They know, the wrong person gets the wrong piece of information and misuses it. That's going to be a big problem for them. And then there is, at the federal level, legislation that restricts some of this access in relation to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So a lot of places, companies, people have access to this, but most citizens just off the street don't. You, as a licensed private investigator, undoubtedly do, and I would hope you're using them to great effect, because they're quite wonderful in that way. The problem comes when you don't understand where that information comes from for those databases. That can be a real problem for you. Now, when I'm talking about these restricted access databases, what information is there that's not out around that any old person could get? And the benefit of these systems is they aggregate this information quickly in a format that's usable. But most of the information is out there in one form or another. Now, information that they have that's not, and probably this is at the top of most investigators' list, is what's called credit header data. It's not your credit report specifically, but it's just the header data, the information at the top. That's going to be name, address, social, maybe a date of birth will be in there. And additionally, there's going to be address history, because over the years of updating credit and applying for credit cards and that, people give their new addresses. And these, credit bureaus establish quite a bit of history on you. And that information is available through these restricted access paid databases. Other information, and this is a big one that I feel the pinch from if I'm not using one of those services, is Bureau of Motor Vehicle Records or Department of Motor Vehicles, depending on your state. DMV records, such as license plates. You can frequently trace license plates through these restricted access databases. You can frequently get a driving history, what's called a driving abstract of how that person's driving has been. And again, yes, the information on a driver's license, like the address that the person has on a driver's license. But missing that information without one of the big databases, that kind of hurts. That's a bit of a pain. The automatic license plate readers, ALRPs or LRPs, license plate readers, that information is frequently available through a lot of the big database brokers. That is privately held information. That has nothing to do with the government. That's just all these cameras, mobile and fixed, out there, snatching up pictures of drivers' cars and license plate numbers as they go by. And that is all kept, aggregated, and frequently available to investigators and other people using these restricted access databases. With these restricted access databases, sometimes there's a good criminal history that you can get as well, and none of them is foolproof. All of this information is subject to error. As a matter of fact, if you don't find an error when you run one of these, you're not looking closely enough. There's always mistakes in it, and then just blatant omissions, things that they miss. But criminal histories will be something you sometimes get, and specifically I'm thinking in terms of arrest history. Very, very handy if one of these services has like a statewide arrest check for you that you don't have to be going county to county for. And again, these are very, very hit or miss. But what it does bring up is something I want you to keep in mind is these different database providers are kind of regional and do have specialties. So one might be very good at turning around phone numbers for you. Another one might be particularly good on the West Coast. And when I ran my agency, I had one. Who wants more than one of these, right? You're paying for them and that, but you kind of need to use more than one. And I had one regional one that I kept just because it was super, super strong regionally for the information that I needed around where I was working a lot of my cases. And I don't have anything bad to say about any of them. They are just the most wonderful investigative tools out there. You just got to know their limitations. Some of the limitations, for example, and they're very, I don't want to say they're sneaky because experienced investigators understand. But imagine, for example, a thing that says, we have arrest history on 95% of the population in your state. That's very attractive. But you got to read the fine print. If they have that because they have the counties for Tallahassee and Daytona Beach and Fort Lauderdale and Miami, but not a lot else. But those are such rich population centers. They say, yeah, we got 95% of the population covered. But you need to understand as an investigator, there are huge geographic areas that they don't have covered. The reverse of that can be true. They can say, we have 95% of the state covered for arrest record history. And that's wonderful. But if one of the counties they're missing contains Miami, the state capital, or contains Tallahassee or something, then you really got to know, especially when you're working cases that involve, say, Tallahassee, that county is not included in that arrest history. So knowing your databases and knowing their limitations and weaknesses is vitally important. Another thing that these large databases are good at, and not, I would say, in general, but the specialty ones, is the social media. There are companies and there are remarkable about being able to scarf up social media data for you, allowing you to look at it and find it very quickly and easily, different accounts and histories and all sorts of things. I think more and more people are all the time joining social media, but more and more people are becoming aware of the privacy risk and opting out. And then you may just have one of those types of skips or problems where the person just is not a social media person. But when you're going to these paid restricted access places, finding one that does really good social media is helpful. The best ones are expensive, but they're worth it. And I mean, there's the whole thing of cost versus value. And I could just lose my mind because people have no concept that, yeah, something's expensive, but it's worth it. So in a good social media data aggregator can be very, very worth it, even when they're more expensive. So use them cautiously, use them when you need them, but that can be very worthwhile. So the thing about these database providers, the thing about them that is just so valuable is that they just scarf up so much information so quickly and easily for you and present it in a way that's very, very helpful, that you're just not going county by county trying to find something. Now, I will tell you something here. I want to share with you, it's kind of the equivalent of going to your own funeral. It's not something that most people can do. But I had a similar type of experience when I closed down my detective agency because I had all these law firms that I was working for. And as I informed them that I was going to be closing down, they all said the same thing to me. Not most of them, not 99. Well, there was this one different. Every single one of them said to me, will you just keep us going on the side? Just continue to work for us on the side. And to be honest with you, I had no idea how much any of them had appreciated the work that I was doing for them. Not that I should. It's a business. It is what it is. But as I became a little more burned out doing private investigations, maybe if I had known how much they had appreciated the things I was doing for them, I would have gone a little bit longer. But PI work and anybody, those pros in the chat room, if they can vouch for this, I really feel that it a lot of times is a zero-sum game. That if one side wins, the other side loses. Not all the time, but most of the time. If you're working a child custody case, if the parent that you're working for wins custody of the children, then the other parent by necessity loses. If you're working a workers' fraud case, a workers' compensation fraud case, if the company you're working for takes the evidence you produce for them to get for them and are able to get out from paying that fraudulent claim, then the fraudster loses. And it's a competitive thing. It's a zero-sum game, and I'm really, really good at that. But I find it exhausting. And so, I just wanted to go into something that was a little more win-win, which is the way my current business model is of training and teaching people. I get to make money by sharing the things that I know, and people get to advance their career and their knowledge and hopefully make more money using the things I teach them. So even though, it's the value versus cost thing again. If someone buys a course from me and it costs them X number of dollars, but in the next year they make 2X or 10X that, or over 5 years or 10 years, they're making way more than that. That's win-win. I win because I get my little pittance for teaching it. They win because they get the money for benefiting from the knowledge. So, that's an example where I had kind of attended my own funeral, learned what people were saying about me when I did close up shop. Keep in mind that your customers and clients should be thinking the same about you. Now, why, to be honest with you, did that happen? It was not because I had access to these paid access restricted databases. It's because, one, I knew what to do with them, but two, I could go super deep even without those databases. And then the secret ingredient, to be honest with you, that you need to mix in is just you got to be professional. That next level professional. Return your calls in a prompt manner. If you're doing process serving, file that return of service. Get them a copy of the return of service. Keep the client up to date on what's going on. Even if it's bad news, you don't hold off thinking that they'll not notice. So, I kind of describe it like this. If you can build furniture by hand with just a screwdriver, a hand drill, and a handsaw, then you get the power tools. You're going to be able to build great furniture faster. But if you don't know how to make furniture, the power tools, you're just going to lose a finger. These restricted access paid databases are the power tools. But you got to know where that information comes from and how to use that information and to go deeper as well. Again, you're not going to get, a lot of times, these databases are not going to spit up a valid current address for you. But when you know, okay, I can see that this element right here leads me to believe there might be other information deeper or more current information. So, a criminal history, traffic violations, that type of thing are a really good example. If the paid access database tells you this person has a recent failure to control citation on their license, they got 2 points or whatever it is, that's not super helpful to you. But when you can take that to the county where it happened, pull the ticket, and discover, okay, wait a minute, failure to control comes out of an accident. You go pull the accident report, and now here's a list of everybody that was in the car with them. That's helpful for your skip trace or even a background check if you're trying to touch base and for all sorts of things. Oh, yeah, Brown, thank you. I mean, there's just words of wisdom from a pro. He says the databases are for licensed professionals and law enforcement. Databases only give so much information. Always go to the courthouse and pull the case jacket. It has stuff that's not in the database. That should be on a poster. That should be when you get your license. They should include a bookmark with that written on it and remind people, because we like our databases. We like the ease and convenience and economy of our databases, but they are the tip of the iceberg. Thank you for sharing that. That's very valuable. So what I'm talking about here is kind of sharpening the saw, as you might say, getting better at your skill set, and understanding where the information comes that feeds those databases. Oh, gee, Brown is given a case study here that is, oh, it's actually right out of my book, 51 Weird Private Investigator Tricks That Actually Work. And I'm sure Brown knew this long before I wrote the book, but it's one of the ones that's in there. Real example, he says, we had a case and none of the search warrants, arrest reports, witnesses, or officers were listed in the digital file. We ended up finding over 28 search warrants and 110 witnesses. That's what happens when you pull a file. Search warrants are ridiculously wonderful. The case files are ridiculously wonderful. If you've never done it, you pull a case file, go down through there, and you'll see at least an entry, if not a page, for everybody who is summoned or subpoenaed according with the case. And a case file that he's describing, phone book. What is a phone book? A million years ago, phone numbers used to be listed there. They're typically thick books. They don't really have them anymore, but a file like what he's describing, thick as a phone book. Child custody cases. If you're working any case where there's a divorce, the divorce file may help you. And forget if it's a child custody case you're working or not. You're just trying to find somebody, or you're doing an asset search or whatever it might be. If they've got a divorce, you go pull that file. If children are involved, that file is going to stay open and active until those kids are 18 plus and not involved anymore. And for people who get a divorce when their kid is 2, 3, 5 years old, that's 10, 15 years of history in a case file. If it's not just one folder this thick, there will be 2 folders with all sorts of information about that person, where they work, and their work history and everything. Sorry, I'm getting a little too excited about this stuff. So what I discovered is, if I have a nice geographic area to kind of start from on these cases, the paid access, restricted access databases, I can work without them. And all of the fees associated with that, which may very well be worth it, but there's none of those fees. And I can a lot of times, kind of quickly, because I know my resources locally so well, come up with the information that I need for, say, a skip. So I will say this, the online sources that are available now, the OSINT, open source intelligence, are phenomenal, because there used to be a time when say the criminal index at your local county court was not online. There was no online for that matter. And you would have to drive down or go down every time you wanted to see if a name was listed, if they had a criminal history. Now it's as easy as going to, hopefully if you do this regularly, it's bookmark. You click on the bookmark on your web browser, you bring up that court, and you run a case search by name or whatever criteria you have. Wow. Okay, that's very humbling. Brown, thank you for sharing that. Larry is one of the mentors we learned from and followed when getting into the industry. I think he's referring to the books. You will use them and probably do every day. All of his books are extremely accurate. Thank you. That is humbling. And after close to 14 years of doing this teaching, and 10 plus years of putting up videos, or 10 years of putting up videos, that's weird. I will say this to you about your business offhand. I will turn this around and make it about you. If you are running a detective agency, especially if you're starting out, it takes time. Give it time. and you don't know. Just like I shared with you earlier about attending my own funeral, these companies that all, when I left, all wanted me to stay. My training and teaching, I had no idea for years, how effective, how much people were doing with them. I could see my sales numbers, but that doesn't tell me the human element. It's only 5 years, 6 years, 7 years in when you start to hear from people, because this is an industry that takes time. They say, oh, before I had my license, I was learning from you. I've used your stuff. Same with your customers and clients. Over time, you will learn how much they truly value you. Please give them the best service you can. And as private investigators, I'm a firm believer that all the money is for the top 10 percenters. If you want to be one of the top 10% private investigators out there in order to make good money. There's a book out there. I don't necessarily recommend it necessarily, but it's called The Big Leap. Where is it? There it is there. The Big Leap by Kaye Hendricks. I think, taking life to that next level, conquering your hidden fears and taking life to the next level, kind of is what we're talking about here a little bit with spending time and getting your craft well and understanding the sources behind the paid access database sources. And he says, I would just really quickly want to share this with you, that we have our zones of excellence and we have zones of genius, which are the next level up. And a lot of people here right now, I know, are in their zone of excellence. Kaye Hendricks describes it as: a zone of excellence are the activities you do extremely well. You make a good living in your zone of excellence. For successful people, this zone is seductive and even dangerous, a trap. To remain in that zone of your zone of excellence hobbles you from taking the leap into your zone of genius, which is where you're going to find, he describes, a great deal of satisfaction, even greater service to others, which is vital. That's the only way to legitimately make money, is to just be of service to other people. The money will flow from that. So, understanding what's behind those paid databases, use them, they're great. But understanding what's behind them, where they get their information, and when to dig deeper and go behind the scenes. For a lot of small stuff, I find that I don't necessarily need them. I've shared with you before, I got a name. First thing I do is punch them into the lower court index, municipal court index, which is misdemeanors, traffic violations, things like that. Man, I can get a good lead a lot of times right there, and a lot of times even a current address. I don't have to pay anybody anything, and there's nobody telling me no. There's no audit later. All these paid access databases, they reserve the right to audit you, because there are things that if they find you running that you're not running legitimately, forget about it. Kiss it goodbye. That's the end of it. Bureau of Motor Vehicles is a really, really classic example. You have to have a permissible purpose to run a tag, even through these databases. Just because you have access doesn't mean you legitimately 100% of the time can. And you can be audited years afterwards. In my state, I think they can go back 5 years. And why did you run this tag? You better be able to give them a permissible purpose. But if I can come up with the same information because I see a traffic violation and then I pull an accident report, or I see a traffic violation that leads me to the information I need some other way, that's gold. Brown says many courthouses where he is located have in-house systems for criminal cases, and they don't have any online databases. You have to go in person most of the time? I don't know if you've had that happen. Man, have I had that happen a million times, and I'll tell you about it here. So what you're describing, what Brown is describing, is very, very common, that there's not a court index for your particular county. I'm legitimately shocked at how common this is, to be honest with you. I'm not even sure there's an excuse for it. But in that case, the most legitimate thing is to go down and use their computer terminal and run your searches there. Used to be, when I started, it was all you could do. As a matter of fact, honestly, it was microfinch back then for me. There was a black screen with green letters you could type on for some of the more recent stuff, but you literally, in the one machine, always had the bulb burned out, and you'd pull and then the one machine that could print inevitably was the one that was broken, and it was just ridiculous. But it was ridiculous. Okay, nowadays, at least when you go down there, it's probably still computerized, which is helpful. The only tip I can give you or thing about that is two things. One, there may be a way you can call in and get some basic information. That was really handy because it would save me a trip down there. Here's the thing. Number two, and Brown, don't miss this. Nobody missed this. Nobody miss how valuable this is. If you live in a place that the county courthouse records are not online, use that as a networking opportunity. I did this, and I just made so many friends and work acquaintances and everything else. When I'm down at the courthouse, I went over, dear Lord, help me. I would take a fistful of quarters and I'd go over to the payphone and I would say, hey, I'm down at the courthouse. And I would call different investigators and different retail establishments and different people I knew that did this stuff and say, I'm down at the courthouse. You got any names you want me to run for you? And, it's just a nice touch to be able to, it saves them a hassle. And it's a chance to network and reach out. So while it seems like a disadvantage, turn it to an advantage for yourself. Brown is sharing real life example. Skip trace couldn't be found, and we found an address for her daughter that was where she had been living for over a year. Yes. Yep. Friends, enemies, and family. That's when you're looking for a skip. Friends, enemy, and family. Somebody knows where they are, and people living on couches. And again, this is one of those examples where if you're using one of those paid access databases, look, here's a really nice thing, because you punch in your skip's name, for example, and you get all this address history and all the people who also previously lived there. You should be able to go down and notice a same last name, the mom or the dad, and recognize this is a relative. Even if, and it happens all the time where mom remarries and now there's a different name, hopefully with that paid access database, you can figure that out or see an element of that. A lot of times they'll have a section listed with, relatives. But by the same token, pretty easy to find that stuff out through OSINT as well. I really despise all of the paid, scammy background check websites that are out there. Despise them. But they're almost all a hustle. They're almost all a scam. They almost all have bad old information. But when you initially punch somebody's name into something like that, they'll tease you with some information, and sometimes it's all the information you need, and relatives in some of these cases are something that pops up for you for free there, and you can use that. I will share an example of going deep without the paid restricted access databases. I was doing a skip trace. It was a witness locate on a criminal defense case. The prosecutor's office conveniently was able to list all the witnesses they were going to call, but for some reason, they didn't have any contact information for these people. Really dirty trick, happens more often than you might think. Not fair at all. Spoiler alert, the case I was working, the guy was guilty. He was super guilty. Doesn't matter. You have a right to face your accusers. And, what his defense attorney was given was a list of names, and the prosecutor's office said, no, we that's all we got. They hire me to track down some of these people. One of the people, I ran a name and got a potential address, and I went this one step further, and this is just the type of thing that no paid access database will do. I pulled all the police runs on that address for the previous year, maybe 18 months. And then I pulled all the police runs for every adjacent address. The house behind them, beside them, across the street, the diagonal across the street. I start going through those run cards one at a time. This is back even before the computer was, the run card was, it looked like an old time card that you would punch in a time clock. And as I was going through one at a time on these runs, one of the runs, the dispatcher sent the deputy out on a previous unrelated case to a neighbor's house who reported this daughter at home during school in the basement smoking dope as usual. And although the run was to check on a minor at that residence, the handwritten note in ballpoint pen in the margins of this card was to smoking dope as usual. Now, how is this helpful to you? Well, that's a neighbor I want to talk to. If this person is going to be a witness in the case, I want to find out as much as I can. The witness may not want to talk to me. The parents of the witness may not want to talk to me. And the person at this point, I think, was an adult, I'm sure. I wouldn't ever try to interview a juvenile on their own like that. But the neighbor was somebody, hey, they're going to be able to tell me all sorts of things about this person that might be helpful. That's the kind of stuff you get when you pull a case file, when you look at run records, when you get accident reports, all of this stuff that's not provided by the large restricted access database providers. Yes, and that's the other thing, a good point in the chat rooms. A lot of these database providers, they cannibalize off of each other. They're parent companies and sub-parents. And as you get into the industry and talk to other investigators, if you join your state association, which is a pretty worthwhile thing, it seems like an expense, but it can be a real benefit to you. You'll be able to learn from other investigators why you really don't need to have this one and this one, because they're essentially the same. They're owned by the same company. But you want to make sure you have this other one over here that locally helps us out an awful lot, that type of thing. So until the next time, I will share with you. Oh, last thing. If you just stumbled upon this live stream and you want to kind of know and be notified about the future ones, please do sign up or subscribe or whatever they do. But if you do go to ShadowAnyone.com, get my free report, you will be on the mail list. I don't bother you a lot, but I do give you a heads up on when the live streams are. So I will see you next time. In the meantime, this is Larry Kaye with ShadowAnyone.com. Remember, do the right thing, even if it's the hard thing.